Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Growing more with less is the mantra of Nebraska's corn farmers, and they're using incredible technology to do it. Soil moisture monitors let them know when their crop needs water and how much. GPS systems eliminate overlaps in the field, saving fuel and money. New hybrids reduce the use of pesticides and increase yields. When you're talking new technology and innovation, Nebraska corn farmers are all ears. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Derrell Peel looks at the rebuilding of the U.S. cow herd. Bob Klein talks about controlling herbicide costs. Aaron Berger outlines preparations for calving season, and John Hay explains lease considerations for solar farms. Oklahoma State Extension livestock marketing specialist Derrell Peel is our cattle market analyst this week. The U.S. Department of Agriculture says the January 1st inventory of cattle and calves in the country was the largest in 6 years. The estimate of 93.6 million head was about 1.7 million more than a year ago. Texas led the nation, holding more than 13% of American cattle and calves. Nebraska was second with nearly 7%, but it did have more cattle on feed than any other state. The rebuilding of the U.S. herd has been taking place since 2014 and helped push December's retail value for all fresh beef to its lowest level in 33 months. Derrell joined us from Stillwater Wednesday morning. We began by asking for his thoughts on the USDA's latest estimates.
This report, some things were kind of as expected, but there were also some surprises in this report. U.S. all cattle inventory was up 1.8%. That's pretty close to what we expected. But the beef cow number came in a little stronger than expected. USDA is telling us now that in 2016 we added a little over 1 million head of cows. That's up about 3.5%. They did make some revisions to the 2016 numbers, and so they're now saying 2015's expansion was a little smaller than we earlier thought, and put more of it in 2016. Beef replacement heifers was up about 1.2%. That's bigger than I expected. I really thought we'd see the replacement heifers pull back a little bit in line with the idea that we're topping out on expansion. This would suggest that we're going to see some more expansion going forward. The estimated feeder supply from the other inventory categories was up about 2.2%, again based on the revisions. Last year coming into 2016, we had a feeder supply that was about 5.6% bigger than a year ago. So it's up this year, but not up as much as it was a year ago.
What do you notice when you look at Nebraska's numbers?
Nebraska's numbers were somewhat similar, different in some areas. The all cattle inventory for Nebraska was actually unchanged. It was reported at exactly the same level as a year ago. Beef cows were up 3.7%. The number of replacement heifers was down 1.3%, so a little bit different there. The estimated feeder supply in Nebraska was down 1.7%. And the cattle on feed inventory, in this report, of course, it's all feedlots, not just the larger feedlots that are in the monthly report, and that was down 2% from 1 year ago.
So if there's further expansion in 2017, Derrell, that would require some profitability in the feedlot, right, for those guys to still want to play the game?
That's right. I mean, it all hinges on those adjustments. This report is really long-term in nature, so it doesn't change things too much for 2017, but I think especially from a cow-calf perspective, it really kind of changes how you view what we expect in 2018 and 2019 at this point.
Meaning?
Well, again, the the idea that we're going to continue with more expansion. I was all set for the idea that we would really slow down expansion. We might see some expansion in 2017, but pretty minimal. This report, to make sense of the heifer numbers, and you know, they break that replacement heifer number into two categories really. There's the heifers that are going to have calves this year, and then the lightweight calves that we're saving for really for next year. And the number of heifers expected to calve is such that it looks like we're going to see another 1.5% herd expansion in 2017. And so again, the numbers are kind of fixed for 2017 as far as feeder supplies and feedlot production and beef production. But what this really does is says that we're going to continue expanding not only through 2018, but now on into 2019 more than likely.
Analyze for me what we've seen in market price movements before that report and what we've seen since.
Well, you know, from the low last fall, we had a nice rally and across the board in feeder and fed cattle prices and beef prices for that matter. Through the fourth quarter and coming into this year, we've actually had very strong, somewhat stronger than expected fed cattle prices. We may in fact be putting in the seasonal peak a little bit early. It's possible that we're at it or very close to it, and that we'll not see a peak later in the first quarter like we often expect to. So, you know, again, we're going to go forward from here. I think mostly sideways with these prices, given that we've rallied back to a level that seems to make some sense. I see 2017 as largely a sideways year on an average basis. We would probably expect to see some normal seasonality happen in that, depending on what class of cattle you're looking at. But in general, I think kind of holding sort of where we're at.
That rally that we saw, was that the opportunity then to lock in some prices at a good level?
I think so. I mean, feedlot margins have improved a lot. The futures has kind of come around, although there is discounts on the out months. And you know, one of the things that may change, obviously, the cattle on feed report, the monthly cattle on feed report that we got a few days ago, really put some pressure on the market with the large placements again in December. So that puts a little more pressure on the summer months. This inventory number really shouldn't change any of that. Again, this annual inventory number is looking well beyond that, but in kind of a bearish mood here, at least recently, this may add a little additional pressure to the market. So there's opportunities right now I think you want to take advantage of.
Let's close out talking about trade. And with the discussion on NAFTA and trade with Mexico, the U.S. does trade both meat and live cattle to and from Mexico. What are the implications of a possible renegotiation of NAFTA or something even worse?
Well, you know, NAFTA has been good for agriculture in general, and it's certainly been good for the beef industry. You know, the U.S. has about as good a deal as you could hope for under NAFTA conditions. So I think we've got a lot more to lose potentially than we would certainly have to gain in any renegotiation. And that's a concern. If you start talking about renegotiating to improve some other areas, there's probably going to be some trade-offs. And so I think that's an issue. Obviously, if you do something more extreme like an import tariff on products, you know, we do have bilateral trade of beef now with Mexico. A tariff would impact flows coming in. It would very likely lead to retaliatory tariffs on products going out. And of course we import live cattle as too, which would be affected by that. One of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that if we disrupt the flow of product out, it's not just beef that will be important in the U.S. market. Mexico is a major market for pork and poultry products, and any sort of tariff that disrupted flows would put a lot of meat, all three meats, beef, pork, and poultry, that's not flowing out of the country back into the U.S. market. And that would put a lot of pressure, at least for a period of time, in the domestic market relative to those that sudden increase in supplies available in the U.S.
Next week, John Moret from J.E. Moret Grain Company will join us to look at corn and soybean markets. On Tuesday, the USDA's Economic Research Service will provide its first estimate of U.S. net farm income in 2017. As we already know, that category has slid every year since 2013, with 2016's net farm income 17% lower than in 2015. Over the next several weeks, you'll likely see articles and interviews from Nebraska Extension aimed at helping producers operate in a lower profit environment. Nebraska Extension Associate Dean Rick Rasby explains the outreach initiative.
To help producers navigate through this downturn in the economy, University of Nebraska Extension has developed an initiative titled Strengthening Nebraska's Agricultural Economy. And we'll take a multi-pronged approach to deliver some timely information to producers, both livestock and crops. There'll be some articles that'll appear on Crop Watch and on the beef website. There'll also be some radio that will direct producers towards some timely resources. Also going on at the same time, there's a number of meetings that Extension is putting on for producers to help them navigate these tough times. We hope you take advantage of these resources. This is the kind of thing that is in our wheelhouse because we have the resources to help you.
The focus areas for Nebraska Extension's Strengthening Nebraska's Agricultural Economy will be published in articles on the Crop Watch and UNL Beef websites, with additional interviews through Ag Almanac Radio and Market Journal. The first crop-related topic comes from Nebraska Extension's Bob Klein and focuses on using herbicide prices and efficacy ratings to select for top value. We recently talked with Bob and asked how UNL's Guide for Weed, Disease, and Insect Management can help farmers make better informed product selections.
Yeah, well, we got a lot of possibilities with that. One of the things we have in our guides, of course, is all the prices for the various herbicide treatments. But where you really want to start in using the guide is look at the efficacy tables for the weeds that you have a problem with, because that's what you want to zero in. You don't want to use treatments that don't control the weeds that you need to control. So go down through those efficacy tables and then find those treatments that control the weeds that you need to control.
Any explanation on how to use the efficacy tables?
Well, of course, the best is 10 and so forth, but if you can get at least 8, and in a lot of cases we like to have 9 if we can and so forth. We got a few 10 ratings, not many 10 ratings and so forth. But basically we want to stay in that 8 and 9 classifications for the weeds that you really need to control. So you go down, look at those various herbicide treatments, and then one of the things you're going to find in there is we got the price of those various treatments, and if you want to use a little bit different levels that we have, then you can go back to the price list and compare that. Now, one thing we also talked about earlier is we want to make sure we rotate those modes of action so we're not using the same herbicide year after year and run into this resistance problem.
Right, we're not just cutting costs while also building on the problem.
Yeah, we got to really, and of course, crop rotations really help you manage the weeds and so forth. Continuous soybeans, and we might have people look at continuous soybeans because right now soybeans are probably more profitable than corn, but you got some real problems in weed control. You don't have near the options there and so forth. And so really think of those things before going to continuous soybeans. Best is probably the corn soybean rotation when you look at the benefits to the corn from the soybeans and so forth.
How important has it become for farmers to get good control either in the fall or spring pre-planting?
Yeah, really those fall treatments and spring burn downs really help. I know we've used some of those out at like our water lab out by Brule. In fact, in some of those cases, we're so busy in harvesting that I hired a commercial applicator to come in and do the job. That really paid big dividends. So if a farmer, maybe has his own sprayer, and just because he's harvesting and so forth, he may want to consider going and getting it commercially done because it can pay him some big dividends. Controlling the weeds when they're small really enables a successful weed program the next year.
Go a little bit further. Why is it so much harder to control once they emerge and get a little bit of a jump?
That's right. And too many times we can usually do a pretty good job on some of the smaller weeds, 2-3 inches. Those 8, 9, 10-inch weeds, really difficult to control.
Any advice on those post-emergence applications?
Well, one of the things, again, look at the efficacy tables and so forth, and then know if you got any resistance problems out there. In many cases, you're going to have to put a couple, 3 different herbicides together. One of the things too, look at additives. Lots of times they can really increase efficacy, and then of course, be always concerned about spray drift. That's where we have more drift problems because it's later in the season and the drift can be a major problem at that time.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to Bob's Crop Watch article on herbicide selection and UNL's 2017 guide to weed management. The February Nebraska Farmer says people rely on the Platte River for a variety of reasons. This month's magazine says recently, online water markets have been launched to provide stakeholders a chance to buy or sell water rights within 3 natural resources districts along the Platte River. You can read about these programs and how transfers are conducted in the February Nebraska Farmer. In its monthly update, Nebraska's National Agricultural Statistics Service rates cattle and calf conditions 87% good to excellent across the state, with calving progress 4% complete. We explained in our previous episode of Market Journal how feeding times can impact when cows calve. Earlier this week, Nebraska Extension's Berger joined us from the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center near Clay Center, Nebraska, to talk about other preparations farmers and ranchers can be making as the peak calving season approaches.
So as I think we think about getting ready for the calving season, I think going through and just making sure your facilities are in good working order. Oftentimes it's been maybe 9-10 months since we used those facilities, so something could have got broken that we didn't remember, but making sure gates, head gates, all those things are up to snuff and working properly, that our lighting is in place, that we have those things ready to go. That's a good place to start. I also think just reviewing what you have on supplies in terms of what you need in terms of helping assist a cow at calving, so things like sleeves, obstetrical lube, make sure you have change or straps, make sure your calf pullers in good shape, ready to go, and that you're ready from that standpoint. I also think having some colostrum on hand so that we can use an esophageal feeder if we need to when that calf is born, being ready to milk a cow out. Also, there's some good colostrum replacement products available today if you don't have some on hand. Sourcing colostrum outside of the operation is an option, but I think care or caution should be used. There is the opportunity to bring in disease with that kind of scenario. Review with your veterinarian just a protocol in terms of when you should be calling them if you need assistance, maybe visiting with them also about what colostrum products would be, or replacement products would be a good option for you. Reviewing your herd health plan in terms of if you had some challenges last year in terms of health, what's some management strategies that you might use this year to mitigate that ahead of time, when should vaccinations occur, what products should you be using, just to make sure you have thought those through. Also reviewing just your own skills in terms of if you need to assist a cow, what are some things you're going to do? There's some good videos as well as neb guides out there in terms of assisting a cow, thinking about the stages of parturition, when is assistance warranted, and thinking through how you might adjust and be ready for that. So those are some things there to think about.
Tell me more, Aaron, on how to think about when to assist the cow.
So I think we want to just be paying attention to the stages of parturition, understanding what those stages are, reviewing those, and then thinking about from an assistance standpoint, if you're not seeing progress at a certain point in time, going ahead and bringing that heifer or cow in and examining, make sure that the calf presented normally, make sure that that cow or heifer is dilating as she's supposed to, and then also really thinking about understanding what your skill level is and when you do need to call a veterinarian. Obviously the purpose is we want to deliver a live, healthy calf, and there's a point in time when you need to realize what your limitations are and call the veterinarian. Almost always sooner is better than later, and so we want to be aware of that and recognize that.
If we get a cold stretch, what do producers need to be aware of about calving in those kinds of conditions?
So we think about cold. Obviously cold is stressful to a calf initially right after it's been born. And so having facilities in place where we can get that calf in, get it warmed up. Again, really reviewing, I think, how you warm a calf up, having a rectal thermometer on hand so you can temp a calf, know where they're at. If we start to drop below between that 100 degrees, sometimes just some warm air and some warm colostrum can get that calf back to where he needs to be body temp wise. If we really start to drop below that mid-90s standpoint, we might want to think about a warm water bath to bring that calf's temperature back up. Again, getting him dried off, getting colostrum into him, and then making sure he's alert and ready to go before we go back and put him with his mother.
To learn more about how feeding times can impact when cows calve, you can view our interview with Nebraska Extension's Rick Rasby in the January 27th episode of Market Journal. Solar power accounts for only a small percentage of American electricity generation. In 2015, it contributed only 1% to the country's total. But the U.S. Department of Energy reports over the last 6 years, solar panel costs have fallen more than 60%, and the price for a system has been cut in half. Nebraska Extension educator John Hay says companies are now more interested in developing land for solar farms, as illustrated by inquiries from Nebraska farmers asking how leases would work. We talked with John recently about why this has now become a more prominent issue.
Well, we're seeing a lot of companies interested in leasing land for solar, and they're advertising across the state. And so with that, farmers and ranchers and landowners are interested in maybe leasing their land for solar, make some dollars on those acres. And the fact is that solar has come down in price dramatically, and that price decline has spurred more interest in building solar farms.
Outline for me how an agreement like this would work.
When we look at a solar lease agreement, a lot of them are proprietary, so we don't know all the details, but if we're going to compare them to a wind lease, they're going to be fairly long, maybe 20, 30 years in length, with sometimes an extension to increase them to another 20 or 30 years. So we're looking at a 30 to 50 year agreement. We're looking at a lease agreement that's going to lease a plot of land, maybe 50 or 100 acres. And unlike a wind lease we can farm around those wind turbines. A solar lease, you can picture that 100 acres just being a fence around it, and we don't have access to it. So it's a little different, but it's somewhat similar.
What's the price structure you're looking at?
Well, a lot of times what I've read about is a dollar amount per year per acre. And that dollar amount is going to vary, and I'm not sure quite where that should be, but that's where somebody that's educated, like an attorney that knows about wind leases, could help with getting the right dollar amount, but also help with the other parts of the agreement, the liability, and some of the other issues that really need to be in place.
That's the follow-up question here. What do landowners need to ask about if they're approached with something like this?
Well, I think if they're interested in having a solar farm, I think that it could be an opportunity, and I think there could be some money involved that would make it worthwhile for them to look at. But because these are long-term agreements, they're going to want to have legal advice. Some sort of legal advice is important for any contract, but these are long contracts that maybe your kids or your grandkids are going to have to deal with. So get some legal advice from an attorney. And you're looking at things like liability and impacts to the property and dollar amounts and a number of other issues.
Some of the questions that I would have: what happens at the end of that lease? Who decommissions? What happens if the business goes under and there's no money at the end? Go over those.
No, those are excellent questions and things that all should be dealt with in the agreement. And I tell people a lot with wind agreements that when you talk to someone about that agreement, what you said doesn't really mean anything. What's in the contract is what means something, because that's who you're going to have to live up to. And if that lease gets sold to another company or another company or another company, really the only connection you have is that contract. And so you need to have that in good order. And things like decommissioning and other things, some of those questions are somewhat dealt with in county zoning or state law, but you really need them in that contract to have them make sure that you're covered.
You mentioned wind farms earlier. What parallels are there to these and wind farms?
Well, I mean, in both situations, the company is leasing a piece of land for access to some energy development, and the lease is the access to that land for a long period of time. And so, I think that there is a lot of parallels. The things that are different are just that a wind farm, you're going to farm around that, really taking almost few acres out of production. In this situation, you're going to take every acre that they lease out of production. So if it's 100 acres, that 100 acres, it's just got a fence around it. And though that's not all bad, it's just different.
Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. And during this last week, we did see warmth at the beginning of the week as we had that high pressure system build over our region and brought some of the warm air from our south into our region. And the warmest day, of course, of this last 7-day period was Monday, when we seen 50s and some widespread 60s across the southern Nebraska. And then all of a sudden, we started to see the cold air slowly sag southward from northern Nebraska through southern Nebraska. Process took a couple days, and we actually seen some light snow accumulations across portions of the northern Panhandle and portions of north central Nebraska. Unofficially, between 1 and 4 inches were reported. There was a small area just to the south of this region that received up to a ½ an inch of snowfall. And then once you got within the central Nebraska and points southward, trace amounts to no precipitation reported outside of a few flurries. Now, before we get to the major maps today, we have done a change in our maps. Instead of trying to combine the upper air and the surface maps, We're going to give you the upper air, then the surface maps and the precipitation maps, and hopefully this will take away some of the confusion with all the lines on our maps and make it much easier to understand this forecast. So as we go forward in our forecast, the first thing we'll draw your attention to is that we have a temporary ridging pattern that's building in as the cold air moves to our east. So maybe a little bit of light clouds in eastern Nebraska breaking up and the cloud or sun moving in and warmer temperatures during the afternoon. And Sunday we'll see some warmth, and Monday might be our warmest day in advance of this trough moving through, and it rapidly moves across the country on Tuesday, moving to a point east of us and then strengthens over the eastern seaboard, brings in some cold air on the backside with a chance for a little bit of flurry activity. And then we start to see the ridge build back in toward the later part of the week with very warm conditions building right back in for next weekend. So wait a week and we're going to have a really nice weekend ahead of us. And in terms of the surface configuration, the low associated with the cold air will be pivoting toward the east over the next 24 hours. And then we'll see lows organizing this weekend basically over the front range of the Rocky Mountains until that upper trough starts to push through. And then this system really moves its way rapidly toward southwestern Michigan on Tuesday and then out across the eastern seaboard. High pressure comes in on the backside over Nebraska, bringing cool air in for Wednesday and part of Thursday. But once we get into Thursday afternoon, we start to see the warm air return to western Nebraska. And by the time we get to Friday, we'll see a big southwest flow at the surface, bringing warmth from the southwestern United States into the Central Plains for the start of what looks to be a very warm weekend. In terms of precipitation, most of the precipitation for the first half of this period remains to our west as we see that low coming on board. So we're looking for anywhere from 1/4 to up to 3 inches of moisture in the portions of northern California. The snow levels start to decrease as the systems take shape on Monday and then rapidly skews to the east. Now this doesn't mean we're precipitation free. It means the heaviest precipitation, 1/4 inch or more, remains to the east of us. And then we turn our attention to the west where another storm system tries to come on board, but it kind of stalls out on the western United States, and that leaves us high and dry in the center part of the country. With building heights, that means warmer temperatures coming online. And we can see that with the 8 to 14 day forecast as from next Thursday to the following Tuesday, that warmth starts to build eastward and it covers a substantial portion of the country, and this will probably last even longer than the following Tuesday. It looks like much of the second week, full week of February will be warmer than normal. And in regards to precipitation, of course, with that ridge building eastward, we would expect dry conditions across the southern plains, weaker chances across the northern plains. As the system comes on board, it's either going to skirt across the northern United States, or once again, we will see it form in the southwest and rapidly move toward the northeast as we get into the outer periods.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on the U.S. cattle inventory, managing herbicide costs, preparing for calving season, and solar farm leases. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal by following us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Next week, John Moret will be our market analyst, and Purdue's David Widmar will look at the USDA's projections for net farm income. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.